Weekly Sceptic, episode 95. I'm Nick Dixon here with Toby Young, still in Australia. And this week, let's do an election recap for you all. And then we're going to talk about the Tory leadership race and the madness of the Labour cabinet. And, of course, paid content for the people on basedmedia.org who get the full episode. Toby, how's it going in Australia?
Yeah, it's good. Coming to the end of my trip now. Less than a week to go. Couple more days in Sydney, then flying to Perth, and then home from Perth. One thing I figured out, Nick, is that if England make it into the Euro finals, I will be mid-air between Perth and Dubai during the Euro final. So on my way out from Dubai to Auckland, there was no Wi-Fi on the plane. The Wi-Fi had broken. It's supposed to work, but it didn't. So I'm now really worried that England may beat Holland tomorrow. I guess that'll be today by the time people are hearing this, and get into the final, and I won't be able to watch it.
That is an absolute disaster. I mean, that is terrible. I mean, I realised I was scheduled to work all the days that England were playing, so I had to change them all. I did manage to change them all, but I realised if I had to work the final and we were in the final and we won, and I've been waiting 34 years for this because I started watching tournaments at Italianati, I would probably rather quit my job than let that happen. That's how seriously I took it. I was like, I'd have to if I couldn't, because you know I like to catastrophize in my head. I was like, if I couldn't change that, I would have to quit. Then I was just able to change it. But in my head, I was like, because how could you miss? Imagine you miss the England final. I mean, you're going to miss it.
I'm going to miss it. I mean, the chances of the Wi-Fi working are probably pretty slight, and even if it does, I'm probably able to get it. And so I'm really on the plane, not knowing what's happened, and probably praying for England to lose because I won't want to miss England winning again for the first time since
terrible.
1966. Yeah.
Do you know what? I mean, there's a chance. I mean, that's a terrible prayer, but there's a chance you'll be all right because Holland are quite good. When I thought we were playing Turkey potentially, I was like, well, we're definitely getting to the final. But this is not the strongest Dutch team, so we could win. But yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's like, would you rather watch the semi-final or the final? I think the final, because if you lose the semi, then it didn't really matter. You know, if you had to choose one of them, you'd always choose the final. Because I was thinking, at one point, I thought I had to choose between them.
Right.
But to miss it, why can't you just change your whole flight itinerary? That's what I would.
Complicated. I don't think I can do that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I'm just going to have to pray the Wi-Fi is working, and
It's such a rare. It's such
if
a rare
we
thing.
qualify.
Yeah. Well, will you be able to watch the semi?
Yeah. The semi starts at 5 a.m. here in Sydney, but I found an English bar around the corner that's showing it. So I'm going to head down there at 5 a.m.
Madness. All right. Well, you chose to go to Australia. I mean, let's never forget. So that's the England stuff. We're going to turn into a football podcast, by the way, guys. Hope you don't mind. And we've got to plug our live show. We're doing another live show, maybe the last July 29th at the Hippodrome. Same time. Toby can give you more details on that. But we're doing July 29th. So if you're planning your holidays, please plan them around the Weekly Sceptic Live on July 29th, which is a Monday. And what time should they get there, Toby?
Well, stores open at 6:30. Show starts at 7. Goes from 7 till 9, and it'll include a Q&A. And then if you want to have a drink with us afterwards, you can do that too if you pay a little bit extra. So regular tickets are £25. Show plus drinks tickets, £75. First drink free. And if you want to buy a ticket, there's a banner ad on dailyskeptic.org. You can click on there and it takes you straight to the Eventbrite page, or you can just search for Eventbrite Weekly Sceptic and you'll find it.
Yeah, Eventbrite. And people have said to me it's a strange time to do it because it's the summer and, you know, people have got their holidays, but hopefully you'll still come along July 29th. Eventbrite.co.uk. Weekly Sceptic Live. Hopefully we'll see you there. The other ones have all been great. They're always hilarious. They're a lot more banter than the normal show. Obviously, we have banter on the normal show, but they're a different level, and you get to meet like-minded people. So they are great events.
They are a lot of fun, yeah. And you in particular raise your game for the live shows. I'm my usual boring self, but you're particularly funny.
Okay, thanks, mate. Yeah, there's different ways to take that. I lower my game for this one. Do we have a quick ad from Thor? Apparently, you want us to do it at the start.
Yeah, sorry about not doing it at the start last week, Thor, but we're doing it at the start this week. So this is a personal note from Thor. Hey, you. Yes, you, my fellow skeptic. Are you suffering from one of these 9 problems? Feeling stagnant, stuck in your current role, at a career crossroads, lacking self-confidence for career or business progression, presentation skills and confidence lacking, conflicting with key board members, business development outreach ideas lacking, low professional or personal motivation, need to transition into a new role and make an impact, and finally, financial pressure in your business. Why face your problems alone? As Steve Jobs said, great things are never done by one person, they're done by a team of people. I've solved all of the above problems in a 2-person tea with clients. So if you've got a problem, get in touch. WhatsApp me, Thor, on +44 7906 321 593, or contact me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/ThorHolt. P.S. If you're a fellow business owner, why not email the guys at theweeklysceptic@gmail.com and join me in sponsoring this podcast. And if you don't know what you'd write, message me because I can help with that problem too, the lacking copy that works problem, including for podcast advertising. WhatsApp me on +44 7906 321 593 or contact me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/ThorHolt.
Thank you, Thor. And apparently, some people are annoyed that we monetize the podcast still. So sorry about that, everyone. And we should obviously lose money to do it. That's a reference to an email that Thor sent out, apparently. So maybe we'll get on with the show then. Hopefully, that wasn't too much promotion for you, everyone. We got to keep the lights on. So let's do the election recap because we haven't spoken about that, and obviously people will know about it. But it would be good to get your take on the night and all the chaos of the election. And one particularly interesting thing was this idea of percentage of the vote versus seats. Much was made of Labour's incredibly low vote percentage versus the fact they got all these seats. Meanwhile, it was something like 34% of the vote and 64% of seats from memory. Meanwhile, Reform got 14% of the votes, but 1% of seats, and so on. I mean, do you think, Toby, this indicates a problem with our system and we need PR, or is that just the game and that's just how you play the game and Reform haven't targeted the seats correctly because they're new?
Well, something weird obviously happened during this election because UKIP polled 4.5 million, so just under 4 million votes in 2015 and won 2 seats, but didn't stop the Conservatives from winning a majority. Whereas Reform, polled over 4 million votes, 4.5 million votes this time, got just 5 seats, but somehow stopped the Tories winning a majority and enabled Labour to win a landslide majority. So, yeah, there's something odd about the way those votes are distributed.
Is that because they also came second in 87 seats, apparently?
Maybe, but you would have thought they came second in a few seats, or UKIP came second in a few seats in 2015 as well, if they got 3.5 million votes. But anyway, who knows exactly what went wrong there? But yeah, it does seem. I mean, it's I guess the starkest distortion that First Past the Post has produced to date. I think for a party that polled only a third of the vote share. To end up with a huge majority, and for a party that polled 14% to end up with just 5 seats, and for a party that polled 4% fewer than Reform, the Lib Dems, roughly on 10%, to end up with 70 plus seats. It does seem, I mean, that's actually about right. It's about what you'd expect under a PR system. So the Lib Dems don't need to kick themselves that actually the referendum on PR was lost by them in 2012 because they've ended up with almost exactly, if not slightly more seats than they would have won under PR. But certainly you can see, but it's hard to see this actually creating pressure to bring PR in because, of course, Labour aren't going to bring it in. They were the huge beneficiaries of First Past the Post. And the Tories will think, well, okay, we were the losers this time, but next time we might be the big winners. So the only parties, I mean, I don't see anything changing. Of course, Reform are in favour of it, and the Lib Dems have always been in favour of it.
Yeah, I never thought Labour were going to bring it in if they won a landslide. I never understood that. As you say, they've benefited from it, and I'm just trying to find some of these stats, but Lib Dems were the most efficient. I mean, their percentage to seat ratio was almost a match. So it was almost like they just did, work the system perfectly. So for them, it's actually worked out really well as well. It's only Reform that are the big losers, the Greens to a lesser degree. And so, yeah, but Reform still got 5 seats. which is a big deal. I mean, that is impressive. Lots of people predicted 0 seats, 1 or 2. Okay, the exit poll said 13, which was an exciting moment, but 5 is still pretty strong. We've just seen Lee Anderson, as we record, posting today, the fox is in the hen house. Quite a strange way to want to describe yourself in a way, but I suppose it is quite cool to be the fox, I suppose. And there was these articles, they're going to do a Reservoir Dogs style entry into Parliament. I don't know, they didn't seem to be wearing sunglasses and suits in the picture, but that would be pretty cool, just Farage and them like coming in like Reservoir Dogs. And I noticed Farage's win in Clacton was massive. I mean, some people were like, "Oh, will he win in Clacton?" I found a load of tweets saying he wasn't going to win, and all these people making predictions. One guy had made a prediction based on the BBC debate that Farage was far less popular than he claimed, and he won't win in Clacton. It's like all these people look like idiots now because he won by a crushing majority. And by the way, his the guy he was up against has already claimed he was felt victimized and under threat. Although this guy, to be fair, replied to a tweet about white tears and said my favorite drink. So he is not sort of unknown to do a bit of controversial race baiting, and also in a race where Farage had milkshakes thrown in his face, a few nasty words. When you've said nasty things, not really a big deal. But what do you think to reform this, Toby, and Farage's massive win?
Yeah, it's good that Farage, what's his 8th time of asking he's been elected. And I'm sure that it will liven things up. I guess I imagine that he'll get to ask questions in PMQs from time to time, and we'll be able to force debates. So yeah, I mean, I think it'll make politics more exciting. Whether it'll affect the Tory leadership election remains to be seen. I don't think he'll be a contestant in the leadership election, but I think the issue about whether to readmit him to the party in due course might be an issue during the leadership election. I mean, I think that, let's suppose you're Kemi Badenoch, or even Robert Jenrick. I mean, it's quite tricky to be too friendly to Farage, because then you're going to antagonise, the left of the parliamentary party. There was some talk in the immediate aftermath of the election that the Wets had been decimated and the parliamentary party had shifted significantly to the right. But actually, I read a quite detailed analysis of who lost their seats and who held onto their seats. And it doesn't look like actually the balance of power between the left and the right in the parliamentary party, shrunk though it has really changed. So I think whoever the candidates are, they won't be able to, even on the right, be too friendly to Farage for fear of alienating MPs on the left. Will they be more friendly to him after they win? Probably. But again, they've got the problem this time of the Tories didn't just lose votes to Reform, they also lost votes to Labour and the Lib Dems. And they've got to win them back if they're going to get back into power, as well as the voters they lost to Reform. So they've got to kind of somehow triangulate and come up with a programme which appeals both to their defectors on the right and their defectors on the left, which is a tricky path to navigate. But I think one it could be that what the Liberals and the National Party have done in Australia since 1949 could be the way forward for the Tories and Reform. So the equivalent of Reform in Australia is the National Party, which used to be known as the Country Party and did better in rural areas. And the equivalent of the Conservatives is really the Liberal Party, which is a more metropolitan, slightly more centrist party than the National Party. And they've had a non-aggression pact since 1949, whereby if the other has won a particular seat, then they don't contest that seat. And they do have a form of PR, so they don't have to stand down candidates in those seats in which the rival party has come second and they've come third, because they can take care of that with the kind of the vote transfers, with second preferences being distributed after the first candidate is eliminated. But there could be some scope there. It could be that the way to solve the problem of the split on the right is for Tories not to oppose Reform in the 5 seats that they won, and Reform not to oppose the Tories in the 121 seats they won, although that does seem like a slightly asymmetrical deal. And then there's a question of what to do about the seats in which neither won, in which they're both kind of competing. But there could be some that could be the beginning of a model for some kind of rapprochement in 2029.
Yeah, they were obviously very reluctant to do deals. Farage having done deals before and been sort of screwed over really by Boris and the Tories and getting very little from it, having stood down in the past and been betrayed, he felt. So, but you did feel it was a bit unfortunate they couldn't have done a couple of deals in just a few seats. Because I was discussing this with someone on my other podcast with Connor Thomason. He said he was 6 seats because there's a 0 6 seats meme, which is quite fun. We want the Tories to get 0 seats, but he was saying 6 seats. And I kind of agree with that because Miriam Cates losing was unfortunate. You don't really want people like Miriam to go. It doesn't really help anyone. So maybe
Ditto
reform.
Jacob Rees-Mogg as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know he's a colleague of Nigel's, and they've always got on well on GB News. I mean, it's like if Reform hadn't fielded a candidate in Jacob's constituency, Jacob would have hung on.
Yeah, I guess he's not a colleague now because Farage is now an MP and
That's
Mogg's
true.
not. So Mogg's back on GB already, and Farage probably can't be, or perhaps can't
true.
be. It's a bit ambiguous, but yeah, that's I suppose he can be because Mogg was an MP. It's whether he has time, but
I suppose
yeah,
if you're a leader of a party, does it make any difference? If you're a leader of a party, can you still be on GB News?
I'm not sure. We might have the Keir Starmer show just taking over all 24 hours.
Well, actually, he was the leader. He was the leader
channel.
of the Labour, but he was the leader of the Labour Party, and he did his show on LBC from time to time, didn't he? So maybe there's no Ofcom prohibition.
We need to know. I mean, Ofcom probably make up a new rule just for Farage. But yeah, I mean, speaking of that, they lost a lot of seats. I mean, I want to get on to the people who lost their seats. But actually, I just want to ask you what happened in your seat. I mean, you're in Australia, but don't know what the rules are over there for voting. But my seat, I didn't have to face the Hitchens dilemma. So Peter Hitchens has been very strident online, talking about you should vote against Labour, vote tactically. You know, you're a fool if you vote Reform, you're naive, and all this. And then the sort of youngsters on the online right have been hitting back against him. Particularly, lots of people have been hitting back against him because, of course, he famously wanted to destroy the Tory party. But now he says no, that the priority was keeping out Labour. I didn't have to face that dilemma really because in my seat, and this is quite disturbing in itself, Labour win so brutally and they won so brutally that the Reform and Tory vote together came to less than half. I think I calculated it was around half of the Labour candidate. So what I'm saying is it wouldn't have made any difference whichever way I voted on that. So I couldn't have tactically kept them out. And the Greens came second. So how terrifying is my area? Because I found actually I've moved constituency since I moved down the road. I'm not going to dox myself, but I was able to vote for actually a really strong candidate for the party I wanted, and so I could feel good about my vote. I didn't even have to vote for someone rubbish just to get the party I wanted or something like that. But of course, they got spanked by Labour. Did you face any kind of similar dilemma in your seat? I may have asked you this before, Toby. I can't remember what you said.
No. It's a safe Labour seat, and my MP Rupert Hart got re-elected. The only crumb of comfort was that her share of the vote declined very slightly, not by Starmer's amount. Do you see that in his constituency, his majority was halved? Quite surprising. But no, Rupert Hart got re-elected with a massive majority, but a slightly smaller one than last time.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Starmer won with 18,000 votes. I think overall Labour got, I think it was 1% more than Corbyn in 2019, but significantly less than Corbyn in 2017. Meanwhile, Corbyn as an independent absolutely crushes it in Islington. So you wonder who is really more popular. So that was interesting as well. But on the Tories that lost, Mogg tragically lost, Miriam Cates tragically lost, Grant Shapps slightly more amusingly lost. Penny Mordaunt lost, even though we were all told she was the great hope, the great woke hope as leader. Poor old Steve Baker lost, did quite a brilliant viral video attacking Ed Balls and George Osborne for their fiscal naivety and for their failure to care about extraordinary rendition. So it was quite a passionate speech. It was a good clip. But he said he was free after years of doing this. And some big wins were, of course, Suella Braverman, who I feel would have won even if she had gone to Reform. We can talk about that later. Ian Duncan Smith, which was good. Kemi, of course. Danny Kruger won. Jeremy Hunt squeaked it. And of course, Sunak won. It would have been particularly shocking if he hadn't, but it wouldn't have been that surprising given how badly this campaign's gone. But he did win, so now he's sort of stuck. He said he'll stay on for 5 years. We can talk about that later as well, but whether he will or not. What do you think of the sort of losses and wins from the night? So you're claiming that actually it isn't this wipeout of the Wets?
No, I think if you do an analysis of who lost their seats and try and work out whether they were on the left or the right of the party, sometimes it's not obvious. It looks as though as many people on the right lost as people on the left. And most Tories during leadership elections don't necessarily vote along those sorts of factional lines. They vote more for, the candidate they think is likely to win. For a variety of reasons. It's supposed to be, the most sophisticated electorate in the world, so it's very hard to predict, but you certainly can't predict how they'll vote along simple left-right lines. But I don't think that what's happened, apart from Penny Mordaunt being defeated, has necessarily helped Kemi.
And that's your main thing, is how it helps Kemi, I suppose. We'll get on to that in a minute with the Tory leadership. Did you think anything about Corbyn winning or Galloway losing? Any thoughts?
Well, I guess only the obvious, which is that during the general election campaign, there was an extraordinary amount of media scrutiny of Reform candidates and Reform supporters, particularly the more intellectually challenged ones, with a view to seemingly trying to reduce the support for Reform, and no scrutiny whatsoever of all the pro-Palestinian candidates who surprised everyone, I think, by winning 5 seats, exactly the same as Reform. And you're thinking, actually, their views are far more toxic than the views of any of the Reform candidates. Their presence in Parliament is surely something they should be far more worried about than the presence of a handful of Reform MPs. I mean, if you're worried about, our democracy and about extremism and about the emergence of sectarian, ethno-nationalist politics and the rest of it. I mean, but the media gave them a completely free pass. And we've ended up with 5 of them matching the number of Reform candidates that got elected. So, that's pretty shocking.
Yeah, and the connection froze for a second there. So I don't know if you mentioned Jess Phillips, but she was there getting heckled by these kind of people. And she's now done a sort of weird tour going around talking about how bad it was, which it was, but refusing to say the cause, and why this has happened. And maybe, this is to do with Islamic extremism. Maybe it's to do with immigration. Maybe it's to do with indoctrinating people at home. Lots of things Labour wouldn't want to talk about, but she just had to say, in one of the clips, she says, it's men. I mean, it is men. It's not Muslims, it's men. She says she's happy to say it's men, but she doesn't want to say it's anyone else. And so that was quite a weird clip. Like, yeah, we can attack men. That's kind of like her comfort zone. We can't say anything else though. But obviously, it's not all Muslims or anything like that. But she is being attacked by a sort of the pro-Gaza faction in a quite nasty way.
Yeah, I mean, she said her part of her rationale for saying they didn't attack her or make her life miserable or turn it into the worst election campaign she's ever fought because they're Muslims, but because they're men. And the reason it's not because they're Muslims is because there are plenty of perfectly nice Muslims in her constituency who voted for her.
No nice men.
But no nice men, apparently. You can't make the same argument in defense of men.
That's so funny. There are lots of peaceful Muslims, but remember, there are no peaceful men.
All men are
violent criminals. Rapey, violent men. That's insane. What an insane worldview. I mean, not that we wanted to get heckled or attacked, but it's very disturbing. This is what's going to happen, the rise of sectarian voting according to your ethnic group or your particular issue. And of course, people think I'm sure people think we're too pro-Israel. I'm fairly neutral on the whole thing, but you can be pro-Gaza if you want. Toby's obviously very pro-Israel, but there's ways of doing it. And when she found out what the worst of these people are like. And there's going to be far more of that. Yeah, so the independents, and they did beat a few Labour candidates, as you point out. On more sort of silly grounds, but Ed Davey won very convincingly. So his campaign of falling off paddle boards and bungee jumping seemed to just resonate.
Well, I don't know if it resonated, but it didn't seem to do much damage. And I think he was the beneficiary of the anti-Tory vote in kind of constituencies in the south of England, where the the second place candidate last time were the Lib Dems. So they wanted to defeat the Tory. They voted Lib Dem. I'm not sure that he can claim that his election campaign was a huge success. I mean, it just seems inconceivable, doesn't it?
It seemed to work. Just if you look at the pure numbers, it didn't, because before his problem was no one knew who he was, and then the only thing people did know is that he thought women have penises, and so his campaign sort of put him forward as like, hey, I'm a nice, fun guy, and then he could say a few things about policy, but I think probably just the main thing it did was make people aware of him. Although of course his constituency will have known him anyway, so probably the reason he won is they like him on a local level.
I've got a theory, which is, you know how disgraced celebrities, people in public life, do penance by appearing on I'm a Celeb and eating kangaroos' testicles, and in that way rehabilitate themselves. They're put through the ringer. It's the equivalent of being in the stocks. And he didn't have an opportunity after being publicly shamed for his failure to stand up for the sub postmasters and his implication in that scandal. So instead, he just simulated what he would have done on I'm a Celeb, but during the general election campaign. So he sort of did the penance anyway, even it wasn't a reality TV program; it was the general election.
A sort of proactive, unilateral self-shaming. Yeah, I like that idea. He's like, well, I've messed up with the post offices. I'll have to get on a bungee rope and fall into a lake a few times. I mean, it's the only thing that's going to work. And his staff were all like, yeah, okay, I'll make the bookings. What a weird meeting that must have been. Guys, I'm going to have to fall into Windermere. So I don't say Lake Windermere because that's a tautology. But yeah, that is weird, but it did work for him. So maybe it's maybe people like penance, don't they? Here, we like shame and penance and things like humbling people. So maybe it was that. Maybe it was that. It seemed like more like a mayoral campaign to me, like one of Boris's London mayor campaigns. But anyway, it worked out for Ed Davey, and now we have a bizarre number of Lib Dem MPs. The Greens. Does anyone even care about the Greens anymore? I feel like the Greens are they've lost Caroline Lucas, who was sort of mad but well known. They've got this new little elf person who no one cares about, and then they've won some seats, not many. And I feel like
did they win? Did they win 2 in total?
No, it's more than that. I need to check the number now because you've asked me live, but I can't remember. They won more than that. Wasn't it like 7 or 5 or something? We need to find that out now.
Okay, we'll have to Google it.
Yeah, we can look into that. But they people are shouting probably now at their wireless. But in general, do you feel like, while I check that, do you feel in general that the Greens have kind of faded a bit, and even the whole climate issue has faded? Maybe they're just going to come back and hit us with another round. But I kind of feel like they've toned it down a bit lately. I don't know why, but the sort of madness of like maybe a year or two ago has sort of toned down a bit in terms of we're all going to die immediately. Though they are still trying to claim that June was the hottest ever and all that obvious bollocks. But what do you think?
Yeah, I checked. They won 4 seats. So
4,
I guess they
I was
quadrupled
close with
their
5.
parliamentary presence. Yeah. Yeah, they. I mean, what's unusual, I suppose, is that they've recently begun to attract Islamists as well as people to the left of the Starmerite Labour Party, and they've turned into the kind of a radical progressive party. And they were even, too radical for the SNP, which is what did for Humza Yousaf when he decided to break with them because he thought their carbon emission targets were unrealistic. But yeah, they've become a kind of radical, hard left party. We've seen this in France too, where they became part of the new Popular Front, allied with Islamists, Antifa, has been old socialist warhorses like Francois Hollande. But yeah, they're going through. They're on a journey of some kind, and it's going nowhere good.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, a very strange journey for the Greens. And what about the SNP? Are they sort of basically done?
It looks that way, yeah. Have you seen that meme in which people have put a picture of Nicola Sturgeon's camper van, or maybe it's her husband's camper van, the one that they supposedly bought with money that was supposed to go to the SNP. I mean, I'm hoping I get them for libel here. I'm not sure exactly, but everyone knows the camper van. And the meme is that you can now fit all the MPs that they were 9 seats, right? You can now fit them all in the camper van.
Nice. I haven't seen that, but that is great. Yeah, SNP, they've just completely imploded. So that was really the story. I mean, Greens, no one really cares, in my opinion. SNP is sort of done. Reform is a massive win, especially in the numbers. There was this piece, I need to find it, but Farage was something like, from memory, 300, just under 365,000 seats off becoming the official opposition. Did you see that? In terms of numbers, he was incredibly close to the Tories.
Farage was this?
Yeah, and Reform in general.
Yeah,
they put it as Farage in the article, but
yeah. It's extraordinary how the fortunes of the country turn on so few votes. To think that only 20% of those eligible to vote actually voted Labour, and yet they've won this landslide, and they're no doubt going to do lots of pretty egregious things, claiming that they've got a mandate, even though 80% of those eligible to vote didn't vote for them. I mean, I think this is sort of part of a larger story, isn't it? About people say that, there's been a kind of populist revolt in continental Europe, but not here. We're the outliers. Here we have a left-wing progressive government. But actually, the pattern is similar. And one way to show that is I looked at how many votes. I looked at what share of the vote Labour and the Conservatives got in this election compared to previous elections, i.e., how well did the Uniparty do? And by my calculations, the two main parties got a lower share of the overall vote than at any time since 1918. So it's clear that the British electorate are completely disillusioned with the two main parties. They're fed up with uniparty politics. The fact that the turnout was so low suggests real frustration. There was no real enthusiasm. I mean, many people have said this. It was the Loveless Landslide. No real enthusiasm for Keir Starmer or the Labour Party, just frustration with the Tories, but actually frustration with both parties. And it's as though Starmer's 5 years will, I think, be the last gasp of, technocratic managerialism. It's clear that people are just fed up with that particular mode of governing our country. They think it's failed. They want an alternative. And actually, don't think this election result was that different from what we've been seeing on the continent.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's a big claim. I'm not sure that technocratic managerialism is going to go quietly. I think there's going to be a lot of conflict and strangeness as it changes, and our electoral system fails to kind of deal with these new changes. It's going to get weird. So, but yeah, I mean, you're definitely right that people are sick of it, and there's going to be a lot of turmoil. I don't know if it's just going to fade in 5 years, but I know what you mean. And just to be clear on that article, it was in the Independent. Nigel Farage just 364,474 votes shy of becoming leader of the opposition, analysis shows. So that's a crazy thing to think about, isn't it? I mean, that's not that many people, and Farage could be the opposition, but of course only has 5 seats, and the Tories still 100 and whatever, still clinging on. So, I mean, they are still clinging on. Maybe we can get onto the leadership race because this is very interesting. Oh, go on.
Just before we do that, let's just, I just wanted to talk for just 30 seconds longer about the intellectual paucity of what may yet come to be known as Starmerism. He said, I don't know if you saw his speech, his first speech outside Downing Street as Prime Minister, in which he said that Labour would govern unburdened by doctrine. It's like, yeah, I'm sure. And I think maybe it's true that technocratic managerialists don't realise that actually a lot of their positions are informed by ideology, and they imagine that they're kind of post-ideological. And perhaps Starmer really does think that. And in fact, interestingly, Blair said something very similar on the steps of Downing Street in 1997. I think it was something like "Unburdened by Dogma." But the kind of what's going to be different about this Labour government, which has kind of perfectly, seemingly respectable grown-up journalists like Ian Dunt, creaming their pants. Well, as far as we can tell, they say, unlike the Tories, we're going to put country before party. I mean, everyone says that. That's a bland, meaningless guff. I mean, the only sort of their only sort of sense of what they're going to do differently and why they're going to succeed where the Tories failed, it's not because the Tories were just defeated by the sheer complexity of trying to govern, not defeated by the blob, by discovering that they had very little power when they won. No, they didn't do a better job than Keir Starmer and his lot are going to do because they weren't very nice, because they were too doctrinaire. They were too obsessed with party politics and party squabbles, and they were culture warriors. But we're the grown-ups now, and so but you sort of get the impression that this isn't just kind of rhetoric. They actually believe this. This is their analysis of why 14 years of Conservative government wasn't very successful. It's because they weren't as nice as we are. It's like, yeah, the reality bath is going to come pretty quick if you think that's the reason the Conservatives didn't do better, because they weren't nice enough.
Mm. Yeah, it's bizarre analysis. We can get on to Labour if you want. I mean, I've got loads on Labour and the new world of Labour, but I've also got the Tory leadership stuff, so I don't mind. But maybe we'll do the Tory leadership first because it's quite interesting. That Sunak wants to sort of fob off the leadership to a caretaker, I've heard, because this idea that he's going to stay on for 6 months while they sort it out, because all the rhetoric coming out of the Tories is we don't want to rush it. When we're in opposition, we shouldn't rush this leadership. But at the same time, Sunak is going to be he's not going to be wanting to just sit around waiting for them to sort it out. He's sort of been humiliated. I mean, he said he's going to stay as an MP for 5 years, but he's certainly not going to stay as leader. So I've heard he wants to sort of fob it off to a caretaker, and he's not going to stay for 6 months. So I don't think he'll do that. I don't know. What do you think on that?
Yeah, it's quite. I mean, the problem is, you appoint someone as a caretaker, and the next thing you know, they've decided they want to stick around. I mean, it's quite hard to move someone once you've appointed them. What would it be? Would it be a coronation? I mean, would the other candidates agree to a coronation?
That was just one piece I saw. It might be false because other pieces saying, he'll have to wait around. But I just can't see him hanging on while they sort it out, unless they sort it out quite quickly. But they're all saying, oh, no, it's not the time to do it yet. We've got to reflect.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that the sooner they get on with it, the better. I mean, yes, of course, there's got to be a decent post-mortem, and they've got to work out what went wrong and what to do better next time, and they've got to work out a proper program, etc. But they can do that after they've won, and I would have thought that it would help Labour if you prolong the kind of uncertainty about who the next leader of the opposition is going to be. You give kind of Keir Starmer a free pass during that period. How effective the leader of the opposition would a caretaker be? How effective will Rishi be if he stays on? Not very effective. So I would have thought it would be politically naive to kind of wait 6 months before electing the real next leader. I would have thought the sooner they get on with it, the better.
Well, there's a chance that line is just to kind of, basically they're still working out how many people they've got behind the scenes. So the public line, which I've seen both Suella and Robert Jenrick say is, no, it'd be too soon. Now is the time to reflect. And, it's not time to get into that now. That could just mean I haven't done all my maneuvers yet and don't know if I'm running or how well I'll do. So it could mean that. And Suella's off in America at the NatCon conference, and she's in this controversial, I was going to say in trouble, but I mean, a few people are tweeting idiotically. So if we go through the candidates, I mean, Suella, I'm sort of team Suella, but she is in trouble now, sort of, if you want to call it that, for just basically saying obvious things over at NatCon. And so Paul Brand wrote, Suella Braverman's speech in Washington this evening contains a blistering attack on pro-LGBT Tories. She says the Pride Progress flag has been flown on government buildings as if marking occupied territory, accusing Tory colleagues of supporting a horrible political campaign which supports the mutilation of children and leaves her physically repulsed. So she had a fairly sort of bold speech. He's obviously tried to make it sound more lurid, but she is very clear on that Tories were supporting this, not just the blob. Um, she said perhaps she talked about how it's not just the blob and it's not just innocent ministers who couldn't comprehend what was really going on here. She says, I, in the last parliament, had colleague after colleague who didn't turn a blind eye to this, who weren't simply somehow tricked by monsters seeking to mutilate children. I had colleagues who supported it. So she's really disgusted, and she wants to make, I think it's completely the right thing to do. She's making clear, you know, people talk about the right side of history. She's saying, I was against the mutilating of children and all this sort of trans madness. Many of my colleagues weren't, by the way. Take a look at them. And she's making her position very clear. I think that's completely correct. Now, where she's in trouble with the party is she's also been saying, we can get onto it, but she's also said a lot of things like Farage showed courage. She said at that NatCon speech as well. Obviously, she was writing articles pro Farage the day before the election, and she's been very critical of the Tories. She didn't name individuals except Rishi, she said, wouldn't go along with her immigration policy. So the basic take is, and Tim Montgomery said it on Twitter, he said she's actually a much nicer, kinder, well-meaning person than the media claims, which I think is true. But also, she now almost certainly can't be leader because of all these things she said. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't see this through the lens of her making a kind of leadership bid from the far right of the party. I don't think she's ever seriously entertained prospects of becoming leader. I think she knows she can't be the leader. She doesn't have a team around her. She's not, she. I remember hearing that she'd done a deal or was prepared to do a deal with Kemi Badenoch in the last parliament when there was that kind of spluttering and eventually unsuccessful conspiracy to try and replace Rishi with Kemi before the general election. So I don't think she entertains any serious hope of becoming the next leader. I think she's just enjoying participating in this debate about what went wrong and what the party needs to do better next time. And like you, I think she's right about a lot of these things. I couldn't quite understand why, her criticizing the Progress Pride flag has been, has outraged so many people. I mean, actually, I would have thought that there'd be more sympathy for people being slightly fed up with seeing so many Progress Pride flags flying from government buildings. And why should, what is a kind of contentious political statement be hung outside a Whitehall department, particularly when the Conservatives are supposedly in power? And she's not criticizing, she's not objecting. This is a point I think worth making. She's not objecting to the Pride flag. She's not saying I'm anti-gay. She's saying I object to the Progress Pride flag, which includes the trans triangle in it, because I don't support that particular agenda, because I don't support mutilating kids. And to this, Ian Dale said, what a disgusting speech. And she seriously thinks she has a chance of leading the Conservative Party, not while I have a breath left in my body. Moderate Conservatives need to stand up and be counted. This will not stand. It's like he's reacting to a completely different speech. Anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, never underestimate the wetness of Tory wets. I thought that was a bizarre post for me and Dale. I thought he was bizarre recently with David Curtin when he wanted to shut him down just because he said the family should ideally be a man and a woman. And he said he might cut his mic off if he carried on. And Stuart Jackson replied, Ian, you're becoming rather shrill and intolerant. Are you auditioning for a spot on the Stonewall board, asking for a friend? Dale says, don't be so ridiculous. Stonewall have become a pathetic organisation, very far away from what their founding principles were. But that barely makes sense because he's advocating a Stonewall type position in his tweet.
It's as though he sort of thinks, as a gay man, I have to show solidarity with those who fly the Progress Pride flag. But actually, that's not even considered, a mandatory position anymore for gay men. Andrew Doyle made a video recently and wrote a piece on his Substack about how many gay men now don't support pride marches or the flying of the Progress Pride flag because they're uncomfortable, with all the other groups that are kind of muscling in. And also there's an element of trying to trans away the gay in the whole kind of trans agenda. So, yeah, I think you can be a gay man and not support pride. I don't see why Ian Dale felt he had to completely freak out about this particular speech.
Yeah, Andrew Dorr replied to this: should moderate conservatives really oppose those who are standing up for gay rights? If your objection is that Braverman's choice of language is strategically unsound, that's fair enough. But the medicalization of gay kids is far from trivial and requires a robust response. So, yeah, it's not even clear that if you're a gay person, you should even be in favor of all of that. So, because of course, yeah, gay people end up becoming trans in this movement. So, I mean, it's a terrible tweet. He doesn't seem to grasp the issues. All I can think. Bizarre, but that's the Suella. I mean, I think she'll go to Reform at this point. What do you think?
Maybe.
Maybe she won't. But if she, I feel like Suella would have won her seat by quite a margin had she have gone to Reform or not. I think she's just quite popular with a lot of people, and I think she could have survived either way. I think some people, like probably Miriam Cates, would have survived if she'd gone to Reform and didn't, as it was. But that's my theory. Other people. So I'm just going to go through some of the ones that are listed in this article by the Times. 7 survivors ready to fight for the Conservative leadership. I mean, Jenrick is another one we're seeing a lot. I mean, Jenrick's obviously, to me, seems more like a sort of policy guy. I find out he's actually younger than me, which freaks me out. But you sort of think, really? But he could do it. I mean, he's quite sort of dry, but is he a guy to one advantage of him is that he has some tough policies on immigration, but he presents in the sort of manner that's more comfortable for some of the One Nation side, which is the managerial manner. He's a bit like a kind of Starmer, maybe not quite as boring, but he's not quite as wild as Suella. So maybe that's an advantage. He's a smart guy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the battle on the right will be between Jenrick and Kemi. I think he is now Kemi's greatest rival. It's not clear who the candidate on the left will be. I used to think it was likely to be Tom Tugendhat, but Victoria Atkins may attract more support than him. I think that Jenrick is the dark horse candidate and could do much better than anyone suspects. I mean, he's got some things going against him. He voted Remain. He was a Sunakite. Yes, he resigned when he became convinced that Sunak wasn't serious about his Rwanda policy, and didn't think it was going to work. But up until then, he'd been pretty supportive of Sunak and been a kind of a loyalist. So he's fairly late to the kind of right-wing party. But on the plus side, he's thought to be a grown-up. He's thought to be level-headed, a strong speaker, a safer pair of hands, and a more finished politician than Kemi. I think that'll be the argument.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Danny Kruger's backing him. You might not have expected him to back Jenrick. I think he's backed Swella and people like that in the past, but now he's gone to Jenrick. And as we may as well talk about Kemi, then everyone on the podcast knows your passionate love of Kemi. So she, but as you say, the downside of Kemi, as they put it in this piece in the Times, these are not my words, is that Kemi would start a fight in an empty room. I don't know if that's true. Obviously, you know, or I don't. Maybe that's unfair, but that's what the Times are saying. That comes from one Tory figure, so we don't know who that is. But and similar to Farage, who said that she was very rude to him. Of course, personal rudeness is probably not going to be enough to stop her. But I don't know what the argument against her is really. Maybe she probably is the favourite. I mean, still at this point, she's been very against Farage, which I think probably a lot of people in the party like because he's been sort of clear that he wants to destroy the Tories. So some people do like that, though some of the electorate might not like it. But then again, she won her seat pretty convincingly. It wasn't that convincing actually. It was 2,610 majority, but she did win. What are the pros and cons for Kemi then?
Well, the pros are that she has sound conservative instincts. She's very good on cultural issues, particularly the trans issue, but she was very good on the teaching of critical race theory in schools as well. Remember that speech in the House of Commons? She's proved herself, I think, a fairly competent cabinet minister. Got a number of trade deals done. I think, she's got a kind of authenticity, a kind of natural authority. I think she'd pose a problem for Keir Starmer across from him in the House of Commons. I think she could, yes, she's aggressive, but you want someone who's going to be aggressive as leader of the opposition. I mean, it's a tough job, and you need to, take chunks out of the prime minister. So I think I like all those aspects about her. I think she's probably not quite in the same place as me on a few issues, but I think she's probably closer than almost anyone else. What's against her? She's not quite the finished article. She still seems, I suppose, she still seems relatively young and inexperienced, but that's also true of Robert Jenrick. She's a little bit untested. I mean, she seems tough and able to, she seems to enjoy the kind of the fight, but she hasn't been really properly tested. And I guess I think probably the strongest criticism people who've worked with her make of her is that she's sometimes difficult to. Once she's taken a position, it's sometimes quite hard to talk her out of it. She's quite stubborn and not always great at taking advice. And of course, it's sometimes quite right to ignore advice, but I guess it's a question of judgment. But she sometimes doesn't listen, perhaps as attentively as you would like her to. But you could probably say that of most politicians.
Probably most people. I mean, I was very pro Kemi. I realised three things have put me off. One is her attack on Nigel Farage. Two is the attack on David Tennant, where she referenced him being a rich, straight white man or whatever it was, white male. And I wasn't convinced she was just using the left's rhetoric against him. I was convinced that actually, to some degree, she's playing the identity politics thing. And that really put me off. And the other is just your excessive love of Kemi. I think put me off. But that's, maybe not a greatest reason. But I suddenly realized I was suddenly becoming anti-Kemi, and I had to try and remember then why it was. It's those three things.
I think on the first thing, let's not forget that Nigel Farage said going into this election that he wanted to destroy the Conservative Party. And, had he not come back as leader and played such a high-profile role in the campaign, the Tories might still, we might still be might be in a sort of minority government now. So he effectively did, help to destroy the Conservative Party. So it's quite difficult for somebody who wants to lead the Conservative Party to say anything nice about him. So I don't think you should mark it down too much for that. I mean, that's just, politics is tribal, and you can't expect someone who wants to lead the Conservative tribe to be particularly nice about someone who's set out to destroy that tribe and is the leader of another tribe. I mean, that's just politics.
Although Jenrick, I mean, Suella's been very too bold to lead the Tories about it, but Jenrick's been saying obviously Farage is he's said it in a more moderate way. Jenrick on GB News was saying, well, look, Farage has said he wants to take down the Tories, so it's perhaps not someone we can work with, but we understand the voters have spoken and blah blah. So he took a better line on it, I think, because if you go too anti-Farage, you alienate now maybe Reform voters are not going to come back to the Tories anyway. I mean, I'm not, but some probably, but some are. So you alienate the voter who sort of has Farage as their avatar and representative. That's the danger.
Yeah, but I think you can campaign in poetry. I think I think all the candidates in the leadership election are going to attack Farage. I think, unless Suella's a candidate, don't think she will be. But once they've been elected, they can then set about, rebuilding the relationship. And I think that's probably what will happen. I don't think we'll hear too much anti-Farage rhetoric after the leadership election.
Okay. The other candidates in this piece, at least, are James Cleverly, who's seen as a sort of unifier. People say, a supporter said, and by the way, Kemi, when you mention her age, she's 44. She is older than Jenrick. But anyway, I see what you mean. She still seems a bit younger than some. Cleverly's 54. A supporter said that there was a contrast with Starmer and Sunak in that he's actually human. And they said, another said James could be a unifier, but the party might not want a unifier. So he's maybe the best of the wets, though they've also got Tugendhat, who to me is just too wet, although he got an 11,000 majority. So obviously popular in his seat. What about any of those two?
Yeah.
Either of those two.
Yeah, I suppose. I thought Cleverly had already ruled out running, but he hasn't ruled it out in the last couple of weeks. But I think he say that he wasn't going to run a few weeks ago. We shouldn't forget Priti Patel either. I think she may well throw her hat into the ring, and I guess she'll be a rival to Kemi and Robert on the right of the party. But I don't rate her chances very highly, not least because she's sort of part of the Liz Truss faction, and almost everyone in that faction lost their seat, including Liz Truss. So I don't think Priti won't have much of a team.
I was going to get to Priti Patel last because I didn't know where to categorize her, but yeah, here she of course won 5,145 majority, and the way they put it in the Times is a Johnsonian candidate who can unify and attack. Patel has been studiously loyal to Sunak and is considering a pitch as a candidate who can unify the party. Questions remain, however, over whether her blunt rhetoric will hold her back. I think the only thing that can hold her back is the Watford accent where you don't say "geez." That's the only thing I can see.
She's supposedly she's Boris's kind of proxy. So she'd be the caretaker until Boris can get back into Parliament, and then she'd stand aside, and there'd be another leadership election, and then he'd sweep to power on a kind of I'm the only person who can stop Farage taking over this party. I
can't imagine she'd love that. That sounds awful.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to be very loyal. You'd have to have the Nadine Dorris levels of loyalty to want to do that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so who's your tip then that's going to win? You still think Kemi's going to win?
I think it'll be. I think it'll either be Kemi or Robert Jenrick, but I think probably Kemi.
Yeah, I think Jenrick is the dark horse coming through, which happens so often in Tory leadership contests. But the fact I'm already saying it maybe means he's not dark enough as a horse. Maybe it's Atkins comes through as the total dark horse, or someone who's so dark we haven't even thought of them. Because that was how Cameron came through, and even Major as well. In fact, no one thought either of those were going to be the winner.
Margaret Thatcher. No one thought Margaret Thatcher would win in. Was it 75? Yeah.
Yeah, with Major, it was all about Heseltine. Douglas Herb was in the race, and then suddenly it was Major, and everyone was like, "What?" As I recall, I was only a child, and then Cameron. People, he's too young, and people thought David Davis was going to win, but that turned out to be nonsense. So who knows? Could be Jenrick. Let's see. All right, that's the Tory leadership. I find it interesting. Hopefully, the listener does. Do you want to quickly do Labour? And we've done about an hour. We can do Peak Woke, or we can do Labour because there are some things to say about them. I mean, we did a lot on it last week, the sort of dystopia that's going to be the Labour government. But now it's different because they're actually in, and he's got his cabinet. I didn't talk about Sunak's shadow cabinet because it seems pointless. But Labour, Starmer's picked his cabinet. Something I forgot to mention before was that 80% didn't vote for Starmer. So one of the first questions he received from Robert Peston, maybe he's going to start holding people to account for a change, said that 80% of the people didn't vote for you. So it's quite a strange position he's coming in on. And Tony Blair recognized this and wrote this piece advising him. And we all know when Blair gives advice, it probably means that this is what's going to happen. He said a few things in the piece. He talked about sort of the fragility of the mandate, but he did say it was a mandate, but he did also recognize all the various factions and how first past the post had fallen in their favor, but only just in some ways. So he was very aware in that piece. And he also said that immigration had to be tackled, but surprise, surprise, the solution was ID cards, which is Blair's solution for absolutely everything. And he also had that fascinating line about avoiding any vulnerability on wokeism. And some people say, well, maybe they're just going to do it. All right, that is the end of the free podcast for this week. But don't worry, there's still loads more podcasts. If you go to basedmedia.org and sign up for just £5 a month, that's the price of a pint in London or a posh coffee with loads of soy that you don't need. So basedmedia.org for the whole podcast, and you get Peak Woke, Base Department, all these great sections, and you help us keep going, pay all our staff, keep the lights on, keep this brilliant production going at basedmedia.org, and it's just £5. Thank you very much for the support, and we'll see you there.